Well, I think one of the reasons we're in a budget crisis now is that for a number of years we were raising spending at double and triple the rate of inflation, even higher. So when you do that for 9 years and you end up at triple the rate of inflation or double the rate of population growth of inflation, you've created a situation where if you do have a downturn in the economy and the revenues that are coming in, you instantly put yourself in a budget crisis instead of being in a more healthy financial position. So I think the spending that we did in the years leading up is the biggest problem we've had, because locally, our economy, because we are so dependent on Washington, D.C., and we've been able to weather this storm better than others. Washington, D.C. keeps spending money. So because of our proximity to the capital, we've been able to do a lot of that. As far as we move forward, I think, we heard, I think we're going to hear on Saturday, the actual numbers that the shortfall is going to be 14 million. I think that's going to actually go higher because there's student enrollment issues and those sorts of things. I would try to go first without raising taxes. I think one of the reasons I propose this transparency idea is that in states where they've done it, they've instantly found places of savings. So I think that's the first thing, look for savings. We need to take a serious look at services. We have a housing, basically our own Section 8 program here that we run that has no cap. So if you meet, it's like an entitlement program. If you meet the requirements, you get the money. I think we should take a serious look at that program, for instance. And the money that we're proposing to spend on a whole lot of other things, like a trolley and the funds going into that, the Hotlands lawsuit. I think there are ways we could go in and look for places in the budget to find savings.
Well, government is about making choices, about making the best choices. It's like good living, you make the best choices you can. And clearly we're going to have some budget cuts or tax increases. I think it is time for more budget cutting than it is for tax increasing. In terms of where I think our priorities have been a bit misplaced. I think we're cutting down on library hours to save relatively small amounts of money and still considering big projects that I think are in many cases unnecessary or much too large. And that includes the streetcar on Columbia Pike. It's something I've come out against. I see we've got great public transportation on Columbia Pike now, thanks to many different people, including this gentleman. And I see we don't need to replace that, and even if a good chunk of that is federal dollars, some of it I'm sure will come locally. There's been a taxes imposed on local businesses to that end already. We also are planning some major investments in Crystal City over a couple decades ahead, 2 or 3 decades ahead in particular. And that's another $250 million that's being considered. How the funds are to be raised exactly is another story, but why are we considering such large projects? Why are we not maintaining the buildings we have now so that we can keep them for years to come? Those are financial considerations that everyone in this room has faced in their life and knows is only practical, realistic, and even green to do that. So a large pool being planned in south of the Pentagon is just, yep. Thank you.
First, let me say I don't necessarily agree with use of the term crisis for our current budget situation. We have had a couple of very difficult years, and this one isn't necessarily going to be easy. But at the moment, it looks a whole lot better than the last couple. I mean, by comparison, a year ago, we're looking at an $80 to $100 million gap. So, when you've been lifting a lot of weight, the weight doesn't feel like so much. So this is a much smaller gap to close. And so I don't make any presumptions about where we're going to be by the time we get to the spring. This is an early look now. There's usually a challenge when you start out this far ahead. You look at the things that are coming on that are going to cost more. But through the course of the months, we manage to find lots of things. We do, in fact, always look at savings we can make first. First, the manager will do that and present a budget in the January-February timeframe, and then we'll get to work on it, or department by department. premature to assume that we're going to have to do some kind of horrific exercise this year. It won't necessarily be a cinch, and we won't necessarily be able to initiate a lot of new things, but I think we're in a fairly solid position, which of course puts us well ahead of most of the other governments around the region. We do have a stronger fiscal base here, and as I said earlier, that's not an accident. I always find it curious. I've been doing this enough times now. We've had this debate through all of the economic cycles, and I often have opponents who say that there's things that can be cut. They mostly propose things, cutting things that we're not actually doing. They're saying that there's something in the future that we shouldn't do. But that doesn't really say what